I don't think American foreign policy is being conducted through the State Department at this moment in history. It's all being done through military and intelligence covert channels.
Macron comes to the U.S. Merkel follows him, and an unprecedented Korea-Korea summit. Welcome to your GZERO world. I'm Ian Bremmer. We've got a great show for you today. Our big interview is Mary Louise Kelly. She is co-host of National Public Radio's All Things Considered. Used to run the intelligence beat there, so we have plenty to talk to her about U.S. intelligence, global national security, and the like. Puppet regime, pre-Korea-Korea summit. Kim Jong-un is with us to give us a pretty extraordinary rap video that I know is going to break all the charts in North Korea. Because see, they don't have charts in North Korea. That's how I'm making that happen for you. And I'm bringing your office hours back. Have some great questions from you this week that I'm going to answer. Now, let's get to it. President Trump welcomes Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, to the United States, the first state dinner that Trump has hosted for a foreign dignitary. That is a big deal. They like each other. They talk about it. The charisma is good. It's a little surprising, right? Because their worldviews are so much in opposition. Macron is the globalist, right? He wants open borders and free trade. He wants Trump supporting U.S.-based multilateral architecture. In fact, Trump and Macron probably have less in common in worldview than Trump and Putin, and everyone complains about how Trump's always too nice to Putin when he shouldn't be. Well, with Macron, they're enormously friendly, and people are pretty happy about that. But look, that's a story for another time. Not much substantively came out of this trip. Macron wants Trump to get back in the Paris climate deal. That was never going to happen. Macron wants Trump to be more supportive of multilateral trade. That isn't going anywhere. Macron wants Trump to reconstruct Syria together with France. That's certainly a dead letter. But the one place I do think there's some movement is Iran. And that's interesting because the president, of course, of the United States is so opposed to this Iran deal, especially because Rex Tillerson, H.R. McMaster, out of the picture now. John Bolton, National Security Advisor, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, they want to rip this deal up as much as Trump does. But Macron brought this directly to Trump and really used the relationship to say we need some time to try to improve on what we have. And I think Trump's probably willing to give it to him. May 12 is the self-imposed deadline by Trump. Rip up the deal or get something better. I think he's going to make that another month or two and see if the French and others can bring something that includes ballistic missiles, something on Iran's support for terrorist organizations as an additional annex to the pre-existing Iran deal. No guarantees that gets done. In fact, if you made me bet, I'd probably say it still fails, but the fact that they're still talking is going to be seen as a win by the French. Next up to Washington is Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, and that is not going to go as well. Look, she is weaker back at home, had a real hard time putting a government together, feels like a lame duck right now, and Trump's relationship with Merkel, nowhere near as close. You remember, Trump went to France to see Macron on Bastille Day. Merkel said, I'm prepared to work with the Americans, but Trump, you're going to have to be better on things like human rights and support for big institutions. Trump doesn't like hearing any of that. Before March, the two leaders hadn't even spoken to each other by phone for 5 months. That's unheard of for the Americans and the Germans. So whatever deal the French are able to strike on trade and continuing to extend avoiding tariffs from the U.S., the Germans sign on to that because it's both the EU, but otherwise, don't expect any breakthroughs from the Germans and the Americans. This is a relationship that is a box that needs to be checked, and we're moving on to the next one. And finally, a historic summit between North and South Korea. The first time a North Korean leader has stepped across the border into the South since the Korean War. Lots going to be made out about that. In advance of the summit, the South Koreans stopped pumping propaganda using speakers across the border. They really want this to go well. They want to show that they have a good relationship with North Korea, both to facilitate the Trump meeting and also in case the Trump meeting doesn't happen, I think it will, or in case it blows up, and we never know there, right? This is a summit set to go well. South Korean markets almost certainly going to go up on the back of it, and a feeling of confidence that we have moved away from the precipice. Can't we all just get along? Geopolitically, there haven't been many good news stories recently. This summit, at least for now, is one. That's your world this week. That's enough for me. Now to you, it's office hours. Got 3 questions from you this week, and each of you are going to be getting a signed copy of my new book, Us versus Them, The Failure of Globalism. Thanks, they're great questions. First one from Facebook. Mary Rachel Ray wants to know why it is that, we never actually see these governments truly supporting globalization. I remember having a conversation a while back with Bob Zoellick, back when he was the U.S. trade representative and a fierce supporter and advocate of free markets. And he told me that it was interesting that all of the CEOs that had complaints, American CEOs, and came to talk to him, it wasn't because they actually wanted to have a level playing field. It's because they wanted access to the guy that made the decisions in the United States who could give them an advantage, make them feel like more of a monopoly, give them support against their competitors. That's not a level playing field. The government's supposed to be an arbiter, right? You need to have an umpire to keep the companies that want to rip each other's faces off in check. But in reality, these companies have very strong lobbies that allow them to pay a lot of money, get a lot of access, and try to get support for their own industries. It's like farmers in Iowa. It's like Wes Clark shilling ethanol. I mean, those things, not because they support these things, it's because they need to. It goes into their pockets. When you have a system that has so much money in it, of course, it's going to be a lot tougher to really support free markets and open trade. Brian Swartz from Twitter asked this.
Hi, Ian. After recently finishing Every Nation for Itself and looking at the arguments for us versus them, I wanted to ask if there are any unfolding current events that you view optimistically with regards to promoting globalism and improving international partnerships. Thanks. Look forward to reading.
I still think you see a lot of support. If you look at emerging market countries like in Latin America, you have a lot of people that are really angry about corruption. They're really angry that their governments are seen to be illegitimate because they're not doing enough to support them, but they're not opposed to globalization or free trade because that has actually expanded middle classes. It's gotten people out of poverty. They like it. That's why they supported the Trans-Pacific Partnership in those countries, even while the Americans didn't. The story really differs from country to country on the basis of what the individual concerns really are. Even in Germany, you see a lot of people that are opposed to the establishment because they think that they let in all of these Syrian refugees, the Merkel story. They don't like the way the population is changing, but they're generally in favor of more trade, especially because it benefits all those German workers that are manufacturing on a comparatively cheap currency. And now Casey Sharp from LinkedIn wants to know, is the pendulum, sort of kind of swing back with the next generation, or are we just facing a lot more nationalism? For now, I wish I could be more optimistic on this. I'm not. And that's because we are seeing the most extraordinary growth of populism and divisions in the developed world right now, even while the U.S. and the global economy is doing as well as it has done in well over a decade. So if that's the case now, when we have an enormous amount of money we can spend, we can write big checks, we can have a budget in the U.S. government that feels like Democrats were running things, right? What's going to happen when interest rates go up? What's going to happen when there's a recession and people start tightening their belts and the companies start really laying off people? Then it's going to get a lot worse. And then the average person, the working class, the middle class, they're going to get a lot angrier. So I think, yeah, sure, there is a pendulum that will eventually swing back, I hope, but we're not close to that cycle right now. So, Mr. Kim, your dad was into art cinema and Chivas Regal. What's your hobby?
Well, I was DJing for a while, but now I am rapping.
Rapping? Really? Are people into your stuff?
Oh, yes. I kill the crowd. Rotate! Yo, my pops was the illest, son of the songist. Now I'm here to run this, they call me the honest. And yo, who this old lunatic who thinks he can test me? I dare him to kill 30 mil just to best me. He won't do it cause he's soft. An orange paper tiger with tiny little paws. And pause if you think pressure will ever make me crumble. On the humble, I kill my uncle before I cry uncle. I actually killed my uncle and I never cry uncle. I root for the Pistons before I let my country crumble. It's been 70 years, we still here and still at war. I just wanna be feared for 70 more. So it's ICBM, unless DMZN. Middle finger to the onset, P5 and the other 10. Punks wanna poke fun at on, but they don't know me. That's a movie that ends real lonely, just as Sony. Believe me, you can't squeeze me. You wanna try? Pop up in your laptop, tell me who wanna cry. 오빤 황송 style, a new Korean ditty. Dance or I might K-pop a US city. I got this button on my desk, you got a bigger one? Let's get it on, word is bond, pull the trigger, son. I know that plays crazy, but actually, from my point of view, I'm acting rationally. See, my threshold for pain is too high, you can't stop me, cause Kim won't go out like Hussein or Gaddafi. My threshold for pain is too high, you can't stop me, cause Kim won't go out like Hussein or Gaddafi. So there's two ways this ends, on the real I'll say it loud. I get my missiles and chill, or we all die in a mushroom cloud.
Is the next administration going to come in and just rip this up?
And I'm here with Mary Louise Kelly. She is co-host of NPR's All Things Considered, which we all listen to. Also the contributing editor for The Atlantic magazine. And she started the intelligence beat and has been national security correspondent for NPR. Mary Louise, wonderful to be with you today.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me, Ian.
I thought I'd start really big picture on intelligence. How capable are the Americans of actually running intelligence these days? How far ahead are we from people? Where do you see the big challenges?
The big trend lines we watch are, will the CIA continue with its original core mission of espionage, human intelligence, stealing secrets, which is something of a controversial term among CIA directors. But that's been what the CIA has traditionally done. After 9/11, they moved in some very different directions toward becoming more of a paramilitary force, toward targeted killings, toward drone strikes. And the push and pull between the Central Intelligence Agency and the Pentagon and where that's going to land and how the different personalities running those agencies envision deploying their resources. And then, of course, the shift to more electronic intelligence. Does it matter if you're at the diplomatic cocktail circuits, sipping your champagne and eating canapes with your foreign intelligence counterparts in capitals around the world? Is that still the way we get intelligence? I interviewed John Brennan at CIA headquarters when he was still running the agency. And I was pushing him on this question we've just been talking about, the direction the CIA is going. And did he want to reorient the agency more toward its traditional roots and traditional role, like stealing secrets? And he bristled and sat up and said, we don't steal secrets. We elicit secrets. We, investigate things. We do all this. We're within the law. We don't steal secrets. And when Mike Pompeo came in, President Trump's CIA director, at least for the moment, in a session on the 7th floor at Langley, he weighed in on that comment and said, I want you to know, we are back in the business of stealing secrets. I'm going to reorganize and reorient this agency, and we're going to be way more aggressive than we have been in recent years.
Well, how's morale in the intelligence community today, those actively serving?
Like any huge community of, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people. We don't know the exact number, that it's classified, that work at the CIA and other spy agencies, but it's impossible, of course, to describe.
But we know that state's been unhappy.
Pompeo was, and in my assessment, remains a little bit of a question mark in terms of how his tenure has played at the agency. He has done something every CIA director says they're going to come in and do, which is get the agency off the front pages. Mm-hmm. The CIA has not been on the front pages. It's been all about the FBI of late. And they're very happy with that. John Brennan has been extremely outspoken. He has not minced words in criticizing President Trump. That has been super controversial. It's not just him. Another former director, Michael Hayden, has been very critical of President Trump. If you're President Trump and you came in with this deep-seated suspicion of the deep state and thought that U.S. intelligence agencies were out to get you, and then you see all these former heads of U.S. intelligence making extremely critical remarks, does it reinforce your view that maybe they are all out to get me?
So let's talk about a few issues and go first to North Korea. Your views on how so far preparations for the summit are going?
I feel like it's becoming more real. There was this surreal moment that night at the White House when this was announced that this was in the cards, and it took everybody by surprise. Really? The leader of the United States is going to sit down with the North Korean leader for the first time in history?
Yep.
The groundwork being laid in terms of Pompeo going, as we've now had confirmed, going and meeting with Kim Jong-un. Developments starting to come out, which again, we'll see how real they are, but North Korea being open to talking about denuclearization. We'll see how they define denuclearization, but what that looks like. The latest twist that we're hearing via South Korea, which is, of course, playing an intermediary role here, but that maybe North Korea is open to U.S. troops staying in South Korea. There's something like 28,000 U.S. troops in South Korea. It has always been a position non-negotiable for North Korea that before they can even think about reconsidering their nuclear ambitions, those troops need to go. But the fact that there are talks at all and it's starting to look a little bit more real is fascinating.
So let's move to Moscow, where you just were during Russian elections. I think you were there election night as well.
March 18th.
What surprised you? Right? I mean, we knew who was going to win.
That the outcome did not surprise me.
Yes.
They see a very different leader and government from the way that we in America consume news about Russia. I know one of my editors was pressing me when I filed saying, you're filing tape from 3 different Putin voters. Did it feel like they were just saying what they thought you wanted to hear, or were they scared to be on camera and on tape saying anything other than voting for Putin? I said, no, they seem to actually really like him. They seem to be believers. And my editor was pressing, saying, but when you ask him about Putin's Syria policy, aren't they upset about it? And I said, they're not voting based on Putin's Syria policy any more than most Americans are going to the polls voting for Trump or Hillary Clinton or whoever comes next based on Syria policy. They're voting because life for a lot of people in Russia is better now than it was 18 years ago.
So maybe this explains Trump. Maybe Putin's just a role model for him. He didn't have a proper father figure.
I don't know how you explain it. I will say the electorate in Russia has some really interesting similarities. Putin's support was lowest in the big cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. He has a big rural demographic who are on board. And Putin has very successfully seized on that, this narrative of us against them, Russia against the world, that Russia is under siege. With all of these false accusations, whether it's poisoning spies or hacking the DNC computer databases or continuing to try to interfere in American politics through Facebook or other platforms, they all think it's crazy.
One final place, Middle East.
Big question marks over Iran and what may happen with the nuclear deal there. Mike Pompeo, incoming Secretary of State, is on record as saying it's a terrible deal and that he looks forward to dismantling. That was when he was a congressman. He said nothing that seemed to indicate his mind has changed in his last, year plus tenure as head of the CIA. And then the other wild card is the president's new national security advisor, John Bolton, known as a hawk among hawks on all kinds of issues, from Iran to Russia to the Middle East writ large. Who has the presidency here? Who's determining policy on these things?
When's the last time the United States has had a Middle East strategy?
What strikes me about the Trump administration is, I'll throw the question back at you. Can you think of any country, any issue where it's clear what the Trump administration policy is on foreign policy? They want to eradicate ISIS, as did the Obama administration. But that's about as big a picture frame as we have for
they want the
Middle East.
Europeans to
They're going to move the embassy where that's
NATO,
coming up in Jerusalem. That's going to happen. So there, again, you can point to individual things, but how it fits into a big overarching goal, how that goal is tied with U.S. interests, how we're defining U.S. interests today in America. Are human rights as important as they were a decade ago, 2 decades ago, a generation ago, in terms of the way the U.S. is allocating resources and people in the world?
You'd say not. You'd say not.
Based on the available evidence, I would say not.
Mary Louise, thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Ian.
That's your show this week. I gotta get out of the rain, but next week, come back. I'm bringing you The Mooch. Did I say that? Yes, I did. The Mooch. You don't want to miss it. We're gonna talk about the world. Be here.